My name's Jane Gilbert. I serve as the Chief Heat Officer for Miami-Dade County. I came into this role about a year and a half ago after having served as the Chief Resilience Officer for some time when Pete Gomez was also our emergency management manager at the City of Miami, and worked together at that time with Miami-Dade County, Miami Beach on the Unified Resilience Strategy, and then developed our own climate-ready strategies within the city. So today's last panel is going to wrap up a lot of the different themes that we've been talking about, and with a particular lens on equity. But we're also going to bring in the theme of partnerships and urgency towards this conversation. Equity has been a theme throughout this conference, and as you heard earlier with the panel that Caroline Lewis moderated, climate change is a risk multiplier for our socioeconomically vulnerable and historically disenfranchised communities. If you live with limited or no savings, you're struggling to make ends meet, you're suffering from chronic health conditions, it's really difficult to prepare and respond to any small or large shock. It can set back individuals and whole households that much more. So when it comes to increasing extreme heat, and when it comes to increasing heat, extreme heat, in particular in our region, Southeastern Caribbean region, this is both a chronic stress that's adding to already existing economic and health burdens in these communities, and disproportionately adding those health and economic burdens to those individuals, households, workers, and whole neighborhoods. It exacerbates the shock of a hurricane, and particularly in the event of a widespread and extended power outage during our heat season. So, and as we saw here in Miami in 2017 with Hurricane Irma, there were unending lines of people waiting for food distribution. We lost 12 lives just north of us in the county in a nursing home due to power outages and lack of AC. Luckily, Florida responded really strongly, put in legislation, and followed up with enforcement to make sure that our at least nursing home populations are protected. But there are many more people that are at risk in the event of a widespread power outage during our heat season here. And this is true throughout our whole region, the Southeast and Caribbean. So, and according to a recent study that was done by Vivid Economics and McKinsey, in Metro Miami area alone, the economic impact due to worker productivity loss around extreme heat is annual impact, $10 billion. That's, if you add that up over years, it just morphs the impacts of hurricanes and flood risk. And that's just a dollar number. It doesn't fully reflect, those are wages lost by working poor, lost dreams, failing kidneys, and really, an inability to keep or cool their homes. And so one of the things that Jim Burley and I really learned during the development of our Resilient 305 strategy is that when you're engaging, informing, and trying to involve our vulnerable communities, you can't do it without addressing some of the core needs: jobs, housing, health, education. It has to be done through that. So we have this really impressive, diverse expertise panel with diverse expertise, rich experience in addressing climate and resilience equity at the local level, at the local community-based level, state, regional, and national levels. So through our discussion today, I'm hoping we both understand some of the challenges that that these professionals are facing as they try to put together a holistic approach to climate and resilience equity, and what it looks like towards innovation and solutions, and how do we get there with some urgency. So I'm going to introduce each panelist, allow them to speak a little bit about the challenge first, and then I'll introduce the next one so you don't forget who I introduced when they get up to speak. So the first, Susannah Tuttle is the director of North Carolina I'm going to start at the grassroots perspective, so that's why I'm picking on Reverend Susannah Tuttle. She is the director of North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. Reverend Tuttle is also the director of the North Carolina Council of Churches Eco-Justice Connection, an initiative addressing environmental and climate justice issues as a moral imperative. Susannah is a co-organizer of a multi-state participatory education in faith communities for climate resilience funded NOAA project. Susannah is a founding member of Southeast Faith Leaders Network and an active member of the U.S. Climate Action Network. She is a member of the executive board of the Southeast Climate and Energy Network and serves as the director of international community outreach for Climate Fair Share Collaborative. She lives in Orange County, North Carolina. So, Susannah, how do your faith-based members serving vulnerable communities engage them on climate and resilience, and what are some of the challenges you're seeing in achieving a holistic approach?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here, not getting on a plane quite yet, or as my fellow panelists said, going to the beach, where probably many people are ready to go. So we appreciate this opportunity. And like many that I heard over the course of the 2 days, SCDRP is brand new to me. And I just want to acknowledge, Heather, thank you for putting this together, and that early, since we're at the closing, like coming back to that early graph that you opened with about the diversity of sectors that are here. And I'm very honored today to speak on behalf of a sector that often sort of gets lumped into different places in those graph charts. And I always like to say, when you hear and people say, oh, you know, we have a non-traditional partner at the table, we have a member of the faith community here, I always need to remind everyone there is no such thing as the faith community. And I certainly don't represent that massive billions of members of society. But I did go to seminary. That is a calling that sometimes you often wish you let the machine pick up if you get that call. And I also do always say that, you know, I didn't go to study theology for 5 years to talk about climate change for the rest of my life. Climate change, I believe, is a portal into the very depth and breadth of the holistic nature of our point and purpose here as human beings, which I hope we can address the causes and consequences of global climate change so that we can start to actually live into our experience as spiritual beings having a human experience, which we have created into a whole bunch of chaos for reasons that are beyond probably any of us comprehension in this room. But so much of, I think, what has already been spoken to, you know, with regards to the challenges and opportunities of bringing together is to reconnecting that of which we are as a part of this amazing creation that is universal in a sort of fact, and the relationship of science as a part of how we tell our story on this planet. And so I won't go too much into, I hope I'll have a chance to kind of dabble in the different roles that you mentioned in my bio. I am if you're familiar with the Enneagram, I'm a 7, so I'm the enthusiast. I like to take on a lot of projects. I'm also an Aquarian, so yeah, I have like a million hats, and they're all super fabulous to wear. But for the last 12 years now, I have been serving in the role as Director of Interfaith Power and Light in North Carolina as part of the North Carolina Council of Churches. I often have to give presentations that begin with, no, we are not a utility company, but it is a play on the concept of the power and light within us and our relationship to power and light. And so as a real, sort of introduction, first of all, how many people have heard of Interfaith Power and Light? That's awesome, because we are all over the country, and we are a network of grassroots-based faith leaders that have organized in whatever way makes sense at the state level, and increasingly we're working regionally, so we really have a southeast region that is working together, and as mentioned, as one of the co-founders of the Southeast Faith Leaders Network, we wanted to even go beyond that brand of Interfaith Power and Light, because that has traditionally been involved predominantly in the energy sector, partly because of the name, but also helping congregational facilities look at their own energy consumption and what the moral call is to every time you flip that switch, all of us, we make coal ash. Every time we turn on the lights, we are, causing the injustices of which hopefully faith communities are gathering to address. And connecting those dots with the built environment, our physical environment, and our responsibility to care for creation. Creation care has become a huge buzzword in our field. That's a really esoteric concept, so we can start first with that which we have created, which is the built environment. So when, how, why, where you use energy in your houses of worship is something that I've been talking about for 12 years, and it has been tough. It is really tough. My boss always says to me, the executive director of the Council of Churches, I don't understand it. We work on every social justice issue in the state, and you seem to have the easiest job, because you should be able to walk in and say, this is in the Bible that tells you to be a good steward of God's creation. Oh, and it will save you money if you do it. So why is no one doing it? Why don't we see solar panels on every single house of worship? That's a long story to tell. It's been a real struggle. But it's also a huge opportunity, because faith communities, as you all know, and I'll be ready to hand this off soon, I like to do the little childhood finger play where you say, here's the church, here's the steeple, open the door, and here are the people. And so when it comes down to partnerships and opportunities, and I can't tell you how many groups, come to me, they'll call me up and say, hey, we know you can probably get a free space for us to have a meeting, and then they'll try to get a bunch of people to come to a meeting, at a church, not include anyone that actually is a member of that congregation to be a part of it, and it's just, there's just been this myth for decades on engaging faith communities, and so many of you that I've met at this conference have said, we've been trying to get the faith community involved for a long time, and it is really hard. So I have some great ideas about that. There's some great opportunities, and I'll just stop there and pass it on. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Susannah. And so now I want to turn to the state and regional perspective from North Carolina as well. Dr. Kathie Dello?
Yeah, Dello like hello or jello.
Okay, Dello, because here it would be Deo. Dello is the state climatologist of North Carolina and the director of the North Carolina State Climate Office. She also serves as the co-director of the NOAA Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessment, or RISA, for the Carolinas and Carolinas Collaborative on Climate, Health, and Equity. Kathie is involved with climate resilience planning and impacts assessment. She's also a proficient science communicator and frequently collaborates with local and national media, NGOs, and other climate organizations. She has a PhD in environmental sciences from Oregon State and a master's in geography and bachelor's in atmospheric science from State University of New York at Albany. So you've definitely covered some different parts of the country. Kathie, what are the challenges you're facing when helping state departments, local agencies really understand that confluence of risk that occurs in socioeconomically vulnerable communities? And what are the challenges in both informing and involving those communities, informing them of the risks and involving them in the solutions?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for the intro. And it's good to be up here because I see people I need to say hi to, so don't leave without letting me say hi. But I'm really a square. I'm a fun person if you know me personally, but I'm a scientist and I'm an academic. We listed off my degrees, but we heard earlier on a panel that communities don't care about us marching in with our degrees and laying them on the table. And communities also don't need me, the state climatologist, coming in and saying, you have a flooding problem. They know what a flooding problem is. They know they have a flooding problem. And the way I was trained way back in the day was very much data-driven, science-driven. Science is the truth. If they just had these data, they would make better decisions. And we know that's absolutely not true. If that were the case, we would have fixed these things a long time ago. But I heard so many good things over the past few days about just the other struggles that people are facing, the other decisions that people are making. It's rarely just around climate change. So I've kind of tracked my professional journey through a space where I'm just trying to be better about the work that I'm doing. I am in a university. Those institutions are not mobile, surprise, and don't like to change. And people are rewarded within the university system for doing things that communities also don't care about. So nobody in a frontline community cares if I have a science or nature paper, big deal. As we heard earlier today, there was a call for us to not just map vulnerabilities, but map solutions. These people want some help. So, what I try to do is act as, one, a connector. So maybe I do know people who know a little bit more about the specific topic. Two, can I use what I do know about, measuring precipitation to win grants that can then go on and help serve communities? And can we start to think about these hazards not just occurring as heat, which Jane focused on, but maybe heat and flooding at the same time? So we have these compound hazards, we have these co-occurring hazards, and if we look at a place like Eastern North Carolina, where they've been through successive hazards over the past 5 years, there's a lot of mental stress, a lot of trauma. So I'm just trying to fit in a way that doesn't cause more harm. And I'll just tell a quick story. I was part of a group that was successful in winning the NOAA CAP RISA, so that's Climate Adaptation Partnership RISA for the Carolinas. And we came together as a group in the summer of 2020. So COVID had just started. We were all kind of sent back into our homes, obviously. And there was a big social and racial reckoning happening in our country. And we looked as a group at how we did climate services. That's what I'm paid to do, is climate services. And it was a lot of top-down data. We're making tools. These tools will help you. You will love these tools. And obviously, again, that's not the answer. So what we decided to do was incorporate equity into the decisions that we're making in the communities that we work with. I don't have all the answers. Frequently, I'm asked to speak on panels like this because we added equity into our name, but we're still learning as we go along. And it's really important to us to center justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the communities that we're selecting with and the work that we're specifically doing. So we've partnered with an organization that has 5 resilience hubs in Eastern North Carolina. They are the community members. They know their people. They don't need my RCPs and future projections right now. But what they needed was some help surveying community members. They were walking around with pieces of paper and then having to manually enter. Well, hey, at the university, we have all sorts of things that can make your life easier. We have software, we have experts, we can train you in survey development, we can process some of the data for you. That's not going to get me a winning scientific paper, but it was a huge help to this group in particular. And then they were able to target some of their resources appropriately. So that's the kind of work we're doing. It's not splashy, it's not flashy, but again, I said I looked at my career and just thought about how I could do a little bit better.
Thank you, Kathie, for that framing. So let's expand out to that federal national front. William Brock Long, so we'll call him Brock, is the former administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and Hagerty Consulting's executive chairman at FEMA, and now Hagerty Consultant. Brock has brought more than 18 years of experience. Boy, I just can't imagine. I could probably spend days hearing stories from you, assisting and supporting local, state, and federal governments to build robust energy management and public health preparedness programs nationwide. He specializes in strategic planning, homeland security and evaluation program exercises, evacuation, public safety, recovery management, and response logistics. Mr. Long provides strategic direction and leadership to Hagerty's emergency management professionals and programs. So, Brock, you've seen time and time again the devastating impacts that weather-related disasters have had on more socioeconomically vulnerable communities. And over the years, with increasing temperatures, rising seas, and growing inequities, you've seen how these impacts are increasing. Can you paint a picture from your experience of how we're falling short to achieve a holistic approach to climate and resilience?
Yeah, well, first of all, Jane, how many of you have ever seen the record, Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys? You ever seen that record? Side B is Mama Don't Let Your Baby Grow Up to Be a Female Administrator. It's the worst job in the country. I do not advocate anybody doing that. Go be part of another government agency that has zero accountability that you never hear about, right? It's I say that I want to back up a little bit as to why I'm very passionate, and the definition of passion is the right mix of love and anger. I love what I do, but I'm angry about the way this country does it when it comes to emergency management. And I think the entire disaster enterprise is broken, and it would require a reset. You know, the Stafford Act, which dictates kind of FEMA's actions after a disaster, it was a great idea in 1979, 1980, right? But we have evolved, threats have evolved, issues have evolved that we don't really talk about, to where the old framework doesn't work anymore. And it's almost like an old rusty bike that we keep strapping new parts to, and eventually the frame is cracked. I think it's already cracked. So I'm not a politician, I'm an emergency manager. I got a phone call to go serve my country, and that's what I did. And Mother Nature and technological disasters and state-sponsored terrorists unleashed hell when I went in. I was Senate confirmed 95-4. I only had 4 negative votes, which under the last administration was pretty unheard of, and which says that I'm an emergency manager. I don't believe that these disasters recognize the difference between Republicans and Democrats, and we got to get the politics out of this discussion, right? And here's the thing. After I was confirmed 2 months later, I got hit with Harvey, Irma, Maria, the 2017 California wildfires. Tinian and Saipan got hit with the strongest hurricane you never heard of, Hurricane U2. I mean, honestly, how many people have ever heard of Hurricane U2? Well, when you're a FEMA administrator, you watch over half the globe from the Western Pacific all the way to the Virgin Islands. And of course, you know, I got Hurricane Michael, more fires in 2018. But if you line up all the numbers and the data of what I went through, if you calculate all the recovery dollars of the 2 years I spent in office, that's going to go out to fix communities over decade time period, it's more than the 9 previous FEMA administrators before me combined. This is not sustainable. It's easy to blame. I believe the climate's changing. I even testified on that. Didn't even make the news. I couldn't believe it. You know, but I also believe, and I joke and say sometimes climate change gets a bad rap, because it's not just a changing climate that's causing our problems. There are so many societal things that we've got to start to overcome, but you've got to hit the reset button on where we are. The Stafford Act is a moral hazard. It does not promote incentives for communities to do the right thing. Pete, what's the first thing you look for when a big disaster hits Miami-Dade, or Jesse? And, you know, when you were... Yeah, but how do you get that disaster declaration? Does anybody know what the thresholds are to really get a disaster declaration?
What damage assessment and we get.
But what are you looking for in that damage assessment? Uninsured public infrastructure.
One of them.
Why is it uninsured?
A gazillion reasons.
Because you
probably.
know FEMA's going to pay for it.
Yep.
We're self-insured, which means we have no insurance. That model's got to die right now. And FEMA should concentrate on infrastructure that's uninsurable that the private sector won't pick up. Okay? Problem number one, FEMA's most expensive expenditure after a disaster is uninsured public property. Your schools, your hospitals, your whatever it may be. And that's what we run around and find. And the per capita thresholds that we use to measure that didn't change for a 10-year period. So essentially in the state of Florida, what we do, and this is where the equity piece comes in and where the disparities are created. I was the director of Alabama Emergency Management Agency. I got Deepwater Horizon. Every time I change jobs, something catastrophic happens. But like yeah, watch out. Don't hire me. But in Alabama, here's what happened. So the indicator when I took office was essentially the federal government, FEMA puts $1.44 on each one of your heads. So the population of Alabama, roughly 3.5, 4 million people or whatever, times $1.44, do the quick math somewhere. We had to have $8 to $9 million of uninsured public property to be considered for a presidential disaster declaration. That's how it works. $1.44 times the population of your state, whatever that number comes out to be, you've got to find that amount of money in uninsured public property losses. So why would you ever insure your property if you know it's going to hurt you from getting a future disaster declaration? So when you see the number of disaster declarations climbing, you cannot just say, it's climate change. That's part of it, yes. But most of it's a terrible business model. And here's what happens in Alabama. You have tornadoes and floods go through rural Alabama, counties of less than 10,000 people, and they're bad. They may have $2 or $3 million worth of damage in one county. But guess what? They're never going to meet a statewide threshold of that 8 or 9 million or whatever the threshold was, because Birmingham didn't get hit, Mobile didn't get hit, Huntsville didn't get hit where it impacted major infrastructure. But yet that county that's poor, rural, whatever, suffers. The community, the disasters that are worse in our community are the ones that go undeclared. Okay? In some cases, what happens is that, and if it gets the CNN Fox News factor, I don't care which news you watch. I read the BBC. I think all our news sucks. But but the thing is like, the thing is that if a disaster goes undeclared, or if you have a big disaster and it gets the national news perspective, then Congress goes, oh man, we better turn on every program available. We better throw FEMA dollars, HUD dollars, SBA, economic injury loans. God forbid you go through a disaster that doesn't make CNN because you're not getting squat. You're getting basic dollars. Why is the toolbox different for different levels of disaster? Why is it not that Pete Gomez has a consistent toolbox to pull every program out that is needed to help people? Why are there two types of declarations? Why are there public assistance type declarations and individual assistance? Public assistance fixes the infrastructure. Individual assistance tries to put a Band-Aid on you and say, let's kickstart recovery and go. But FEMA was never designed, nor should it be designed, to make anybody whole, right? It's a very frustrating position to be in. But why do you have two different standards? Most of the disasters that are declared are public infrastructure only. The individual assistance piece doesn't get turned on, right? Here's the other thing. It's a black and white issue when it comes to insured or uninsured. The biggest growing problem in our country, as I see it, one of the biggest, let me back up. In the disaster arena is we don't ask people to properly prepare in a manner we see fit. For example, why are we telling people to go buy supplies for 3 to 5 days when it's an unrealistic financial ask, not in poor communities, but 70% of households right now? because of asset poverty, not because I don't make enough money to make ends meet. It's because I make a great living. I'm in debt up to my eyeballs, and you know what I'm doing? I'm cutting back on insurance. I'm making my family and myself more vulnerable. We don't teach anybody how money works. We don't teach anybody how insurance works. We don't teach the basic ways of doing it. But here's what I would do. Stop